Welcome to Leadership Rediscovered. I'm your host, Laura Siebold, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Chuck Olsson, who is the Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for First United Bank and Trust. Chuck, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to this.
I am as well. Chuck has 40 years of experience in the human resources field, working in financial services industry, specifically in the community banking sector. Chuck joined First United Bank and Trust in 2014 as the Chief Human Resources Officer, and prior to that, Chuck was the Chief Talent Officer for Seacoast National Bank, which is located in Florida's East Coast. And that's where he led the execution of all human capital management strategies since 1992. Chuck has broad experience in the areas of talent management and selection, employee development and organizational leadership cultures, compensation design, and reward systems. His educational background includes a BS in psychology and sociology from Jacksonville University and a master's in industrial psychology from the University of Central Florida. With a strong passion for community service, Chuck has served on and supported the executive committees of numerous nonprofit organizations centered on child protection and early education. He has facilitated numerous leadership training and strategic planning programs for community organizations, including local United Ways, county and city governments, economic development and chamber organizations, early childhood education, children's services organizations, and county school systems. Chuck currently works with the Garrett County Chamber of Commerce Workforce Development, Garrett County DEI Committee, Garrett County HR Roundtable, Garrett Mentors, and Oakland's Lions Club. Woo! Mouthful, but that's important to talk about because you have a really extensive volunteer experience as well.
Yeah. Been a big part of my mission in life is to support my communities, and I've had some really, really tremendous opportunities to work with some great organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just speaks to, what we're going to talk about today, but just so many opportunities that you've had in your career to lead and to be a part of leadership. So I just want to jump right in here and take us on your leadership journey.
Excellent. What part? 40 years is a long time.
All the way from the beginning.
To the back. We're going to be here for a while. No, it's really been a fascinating journey, and a lot of people ask me about, why human resources, and it really became evident early in my life that leadership was really fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I had some early opportunities in high school. I was class president, had a chance to kind of organize and pull people together. It really required a lot of leadership to move people and to get people to participate. Yeah. College, same thing. I was always the guy putting sports teams together, very passionate about sports and the concepts of leadership and teamwork. And then even in my early jobs, having an opportunity to supervise and lead people where I started seeing some really bad examples of leadership.
Yeah.
And I think I've mentioned to you before that it was a kind of a combination of what I was studying at school at the time and then just seeing really poor examples of people being led over or mismanaged that really kind of pushed me into this career field.
Yeah. And the rest is history.
And the rest is history. And 4 years went by very quickly, by the way.
It does go quick, doesn't it?
It does.
And, your perspective is so unique in that you have had that ability to see leadership over a span of time. And I am curious what changes perhaps you have seen in leadership or how it's evolved from when you started in Florida, to present.
There really has been a real shift. The industry that I joined was used to call personnel.
Yes.
And it really was just the resource, and it was really, stimulated by a lot of the federal employment laws that were enacted in the 60s and the 70s that required departments to be more compliant around record keeping and consistency. When I came into the field, it had evolved into something called human resources, where there was tools available mostly in the areas of how to measure and assess talent, how to interview better, understand competencies, really starting to become more of a toolkit for organizations, leadership teams, management teams to be able to leverage people better in terms of how to get them to be productive. During those times, it really was, I think, more of a context of management. How do I get people to do what I need them to do and do it in the way that we have to have things done? But over time, especially as generational started changing in terms of the workforce itself, the evolution of millennial generations, Generation X, you started seeing more of a holistic approach being taken about how people needed to be led and motivated. And so leadership became much more of a pronounced opportunity and really turned into an area of real study within the field. The questions are leaders born or are leaders developed?
Yeah.
And I've been asked that question. I think it's a little of both.
I know. I was going to say, what's your answer to that?
It's a little of both.
A little bit.
But yeah, you're now in a time and era where it's called human capital management. And the competitive nature of business has gotten to such a fine point where the products, the services, the delivery channels have created such a level playing field. The only differentiation you have is the capabilities and the talents of the people that you work with. And so, leadership becomes even more vital at that point. And what I've recognized, especially I've been in the banking industry the whole time, of how culture has really been kind of a driving force of that, and understanding really kind of what the principles and the dynamics of what creates great working cultures.
Yeah, and I want to spend a little bit more time with you on that because I had the opportunity to meet you when we were on a business mastermind panel together and was really impressed with a lot of your conversation around culture and values, and I think it's something I'm passionate about, so that's why I got excited when I thought, yeah, who is this guy? He talks about the things that I'm interested in, and that I agree with what he's saying here. But I think there are still people are kind of across the board in terms of how much they buy into culture and how important is it, and even I think sometimes senior executives may make an assumption around, well, we have a very strong culture here, and it's one culture wherever you go in the organization. And so that conversation, I think, becomes a little bit interesting when you think about, well, do you really know what culture exists in this location over here or this department over there or within that leadership structure? So if you could expand, just on what you know about culture and the impact that it does have on the business.
Going back to your first statements about why this needed to take place, the development of culture and leadership is a very top-line element in a business model where management is what drives the results, leadership gets the right results. And what culture really represents is the belief system of the organization of the people that work there. And it's pretty interesting because if you don't really understand that each individual in your company brings a unique set of experiences, a unique value system, advanced organizations will understand that to the point where they can leverage an understanding that there's a shared set of values that you typically recruit for and then build your culture based on those shared values. When you have that put together, it really does then resonate in terms of the glue, the family feeling that you get with inside of a company. And it doesn't then turn into the role of the CEO or a top-level manager to dictate the culture. It kind of flows itself. One of the things that I have found, most amazing, especially around the concepts of missions and mission statements, and I think this is somewhat of a unique way to look at it, is that an organizational mission is nothing more than the collective personal missions of everybody that works there. So when you take that opportunity to help employees discover what that is, then it becomes a real binding opportunity. And maybe one of the things to talk about at some point is where are we today with the fact that we've just experienced what they call the Great Resignation and people separating from companies. When I say this is the exact opportunity to apply some of this thinking to be able to pull employees in and keep them there and then become an employer of choice.
Yeah, actually, you're more than welcome to expand on that right now if you'd like, just because I do think it is so top of mind for people. And I talk to a lot of people all the time about how do we capture that heart from the employees. We don't necessarily just want their head in their hands. We want their heart too. How do we do that? How do we get them to show up? How do we pull them here versus, the opportunity where they have to join somewhere else?
This might be an oversimplification, but, the concept of a mission and an individual's personal mission, I would say it's really the collection of four things. It's their talents, what they're really good at, their passions, what they care the most about, the activities that they'd like to place themselves in that serve as purpose, a vision that they have for their future accomplishments, their future achievements, what are they growing towards, and then this keen understanding of the value system that they work and live by. These are values that are instituted us by our parents in our younger time. They say by the time we're about 18 or 20 years old, our personal values are kind of locked in.
Wow.
But
That's pretty young,
it
actually.
is. But you think about all the experiences that you have because we
Yeah.
tend to model people with values that we aspire to,
Right.
parents being your first models. But why that's important is that all your behaviors flow out of that. So when you
Hmm.
have, as a leader, when you have an innate understanding of that, then the question is how do you commission that? How do you bring it in? How do you turn it on?
Hmm.
And that's where the challenges of leadership exist. So leaders today, that are trying to create these dynamic workplaces have to be very tuned in to the needs of their employees on these four dimensions. And
Yes.
once you have it, then the ability to create followership comes because then you're going to work to the needs of the person at the same time connecting them to the needs of the organization.
Yes.
And if you got the right value system and everybody's kind of thinking the same way and
Hmm.
working the same way, you recognize what those talents are, the passions are. I think a common one is people want to contribute.
Hmm.
People want to serve other people and have the opportunity to make a difference in terms of
Yes.
what they do. These are really fundamental aspects of why most people will come to work and why they work there.
Hmm.
First United Bank and Trust, we have employees that have been there for over 30, 40 years.
Wow.
The banking industry has a tendency to create long-term legacies of employees. And when you really talk with them and learn why they're there, it's the family that kept them glued together. But
Hmm.
as the industry changed, the new things they got a chance to do, the opportunities to learn and grow were all at
Yeah.
the same time available to them. So those are all things that I think organizations have to think about continually was how are we going to grow our employees? What opportunities do we need to provide to them?
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you because I think a lot of the research out there talks about, contributing to something bigger and being a
Right.
part of something bigger than ourselves. And then also, yes, those opportunities just to continue to learn and grow and be exposed to different things. And sometimes that's hard in smaller organizations or flatter structures where you don't necessarily, I think people are still programmed that growth is promotion up
Mm-hmm.
a ladder,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so trying to maybe educate employees or companies to recognize there's other ways to continue to grow that's not just necessarily up a very defined and siloed path.
And that's a really, really important subject because there is limited opportunities to grow vertically.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
usually based on attrition or organizational changes that will create new opportunities in front of it.
Right.
One of the things that we coined at First United is it's about horizontal growth, the
Mm.
opportunity to learn from your peers, the opportunity to learn from other people to widen your ability. Now, that's a strategy that community banks and our bank has to take because we compete with larger banks that are more vertical in
Yeah.
nature. But our thought is that if you have employees that are more versed, wider in their knowledge, wider in their skills and applications, that actually
Hmm.
is better for the customer and more efficient for us to be able to operate.
Yeah. Well,
So
absolutely.
we're more nimble as a result of that. But again, that takes a tremendous amount of investment in time because it's not
Hmm.
easy to say, let's work on this chair today and then go have you sit over here because there's limited chairs to be able to do that. But we
Yeah.
have some techniques and systems that go into place that make that all happen and consider what you call an empowered development system that we work with at the
Yeah.
bank.
I know I talk a lot of times. I mean, my background's in HR,
Hmm.
you're working in HR, so certainly I have a lot of colleagues and friends in HR. And sometimes I think learning professionals, organizational development professionals, HR professionals, sometimes there's a challenge of making a case for why that investment matters and why a company should take the time to do that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you make that
Yeah,
case?
yeah, and it's interesting because you're right. A lot of training professionals are always talking about I have to prove the ROI, the
Yes.
investment in this, and
Yes.
and you know, and there are metrics out there, but it's somewhat soft in nature if you think about it.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
it's just the commitment that CEOs have to have, and
Mhm.
organizations, management teams understand that you have to make that investment.
Yeah.
Anybody that's worked with the generation of workers that's come in the last 10 years, it's been very evident. You see the lack of tenure. You see the fact that
Mhm.
they're looking for something else to do. You
Mhm.
can prove it through your turnover statistics more than anything else or your exit interviews.
Right.
But yeah, it's a tough commitment because you have to put the time and the energy and the resources into making it happen.
Mhm.
But again, if you have a long-term view, a long-term strategy, my bank is very fortunate. We've been in business for
Mhm.
122 years.
That's
We
amazing.
operate in a county that does not have a deep population to pull from, and it almost was a requirement that we had to find ways to develop our own employees. But yeah, that's unique for the banking
122
industry. Yeah,
years.
there's not a lot of banks that
Wow.
can say they've been around for 122 years.
No, not a lot of companies,
No,
period, that can say
exactly,
they've been around
exactly.
122
But
years.
it's an investment, and that's why I
Yes.
feel the industry is moving away from human resources to human capital management. There is capital
Hmm.
involved in people. Now,
Right.
we don't commoditize them, we don't put numbers on them, even though you can.
Yeah.
But the concept is that the same principle that you understand of the accounting and financial principles of the capital of a company, the money that represents that capital,
Mhm.
how you look to invest that, nurture that in a way that grows shareholder value. There's absolutely the same principles for our people. And if
Yes.
you don't make that investment, they will go other places.
Yes, they will.
They
And it
will.
costs
It
more
does.
to deal with that
It
turnover too.
does.
And to me it's been such a simple math equation of if you have the ability to get the greatest potential out of that
Right.
asset, a lot of companies say people are our
Yep.
greatest asset,
Yep.
and yes, also I did payroll at one point in my life. They're
Yeah.
also a huge representative of a cost to a
Costs. Yeah.
company too,
Yeah.
right? So if you can take that asset and get the highest potential out of that asset, it's a win-win because you've got an employee who's likely very engaged and satisfied and productive in the work they're doing,
Yep.
but then the organization is getting the benefit from that too. So
Yep.
to me it's simple, but sometimes it's harder. I don't know if it's more of an abstract. I think you hit the nail on the head with the long term. I think sometimes, especially in companies where they're very much managed from a quarter to quarter basis,
Right.
it's hard to understand the connection between if I spend this money or if I invest this time or whatever that investment is,
Right.
when do I reap the rewards of
Right.
that?
Right. You talked about the need for metrics, and I do think it's more of a payroll metric, and there's been tremendous studies placed out there. Turnover, the loss of an employee that you've hired can sometimes result in 4 times the annual cost of their salary.
Yeah, 4 times
4 times.
annual cost of their salary.
And
Yeah.
turnover in our industry is the customer service representatives, we call them relationship advisors in our franchise, that when we see the turnover occur, we know that there's been an investment because we know of the training time and the cost. It's easy to quantify this, but at the same time, the disruption factor that occurs within your teams, the fact that you have new employees that are coming in where you've lost seniority before, it just is so disruptive. So what is the answer? It's not only just the investment, it's the leadership that's needed.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've had, the most satisfaction in my career is that as those moments are coming and you create cultures of communications and openness, the opportunity to survey employees so you can understand and pulse them in terms of where they might be coming from, is the opportunity to talk with managers in their context of leadership. And it can't be taught. I mean, these are skills in empathic listening.
Yes.
It's in the opportunity to ask probing questions. I've always said the difference between management is you're telling them what to do, or leadership is you're asking. And it's a real tough thing to do
That's more of a
sometimes.
coaching style.
It's absolutely coaching. Yeah, very good.
But
Very
that's
good.
so true. What else? You were starting to rattle off. I liked these attributes, and I interrupted you, so I apologize.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
What other qualities do you see in terms of successful leadership?
The one that I've always thought was probably the single most important is vision. You have to be able to articulate where the organization's going, and not only just in terms of that, but then also as you then understand the needs of the employees and how it affects them.
Yes.
What's in it for them.
Yes.
And I've actually seen in one of the early parts of my career, my bank was acquired literally 4 times when I first came to work in banking. And by the 4th acquisition became something now called Bank of America.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, a few people have.
That little bank.
Yeah, that little bank. And I jumped over to a little bank after that for cultural reasons.
Yeah.
But what was really fascinating was the lack of vision. It was just there to be sold. And so it was really hard to kind of glue yourself into it a little bit. Now, for me, it created tremendous advantages because with every merger, there was a reorganization and I got a different skill and a new job.
Right.
But I had other friends that sat there and told me that, this just wasn't for them anymore and they were going to go do something else. But, vision is so important right now. And there's a lot of things we can talk about what that vision needs to be. And in my mind, it's not a vision of, why we're doing something because we have to. It's because of what we aspire to be.
Yes.
A lot of opportunity and the opportunity to see a clear path and a vision of what we could be in the future, as opposed to the fear that comes with because we're not performing the way we should be, that we might be sold, that we might have to do some things differently, we might have to reorganize. That's not vision.
No.
So I think that's one of the strongest components of it. The other is then to convey hope. And you and I have
Ooh, I
talked a lot
love
about hope.
that. Yes.
There's fear in business. There's
Yes.
fear in leadership.
Yes.
There's fear in the world.
Yes.
And an effective leader knows how to, mitigate that through hope. And again, this is where empowerment comes from. Fear is a form of control.
Yes.
If we threaten employees with tomorrow being a bad day and we all have to work harder to do that, then that's a form of control. And that probably lends itself more to management actions. But leadership is about inspiring hope. It's about creating empowerment, and that's its own capacity of leadership.
Yes.
So the ability for a manager to understand that as a leader, they have to empower their employees. And empowerment is a very unique strategy. One size doesn't fit all.
Right.
It's based on needs. It's based on their skill sets. It's based on their aspirations. But when you effectively empower somebody, this is where talent gets released. And that is the big opportunity here, that you want to release the talent.
Yeah.
So that they basically are going to, run over you at one point because they're working at such a high level.
Right.
You're just trying to keep up with them some days. And I'm very fortunate. I got a team of highly empowered, very skilled people.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it's just amazing to watch them blossom and the things that they do to contribute to our company.
That takes a lot of emotional maturity, though, to be comfortable hiring people, surrounding yourself with people who are quote unquote better than you, and again, we all bring different strengths to the table. So that's going to exist everywhere. But I think that does hold leaders back sometimes when they are threatened by someone, either a peer or a direct report, and know that I want to hold them back a little bit or at an arm's length so that they don't get too big.
Well, and is that something that's just them, or was that the culture that created that? And again,
well, that's an interesting question, Chuck.
Early days of Bank of America, and the Bank of America model was to kill the culture that they acquired, and there was different techniques that they use it. So if there's any Bank of America employees on the airwaves here, anybody in senior management in Bank of America, I'm only going to speak from my experience.
Disclaimer.
Well, it kind of is, but it's a strategy because it's important to be able to move companies in new directions quicker, especially when they're being integrated. But what it did is it created fear, and that fear did not, I don't think, really supported the ultimate outcome, especially when that becomes a reputation in the street. Why work for a company that's going to be the end of your career,
right?
Because of the way that they've used it. So again, it takes this courage of an executive. It takes a courage of a CEO to recognize that these are all facets of industry and business today, where they have to be able to step above that and say, I'm doing this for another reason. And as you were asking that question, I thought about, well, why do I do this? It's because you care deeply about people.
Yes.
There's this need to grow people. There's this opportunity to have them flourish. It's an opportunity to influence based on whatever abilities you have to help them become something bigger than you could have ever been.
Yes.
Especially when you have a high performer on your team.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so rewarding to watch people just thrive.
Unlimited how you do it and how quickly they thrive towards it. But you set those conditions as a leader to make that happen.
Yeah.
So they have to have the room to be able to have thought. They have to have the abilities to safely be able to disagree. They have to have the ability to fail.
Yes. Ooh, we don't like that word in business.
Well, we don't. But we also understand that failure is the greater teacher. So, and I've always, it's always been interesting. I've had opportunities to work with a variety of different processes inside of the HR function. And I can remember a handful of the systems integrations we've done to put our HRS platform into different places, and the concerns that my people who are by nature have to be accurate and perfect and didn't want to fail. And I've proven this time and time again is all you have to tell them, if it would break it, it could be fixed.
Yes.
But it takes all the fear out of it, because that's the truth. If we broke it, we're just going to fix it. And we might have to apologize. We might have to disrupt some people. We might have to tell somebody it didn't work. But in the meantime, let's get it so it works right. And it's always been amazing, because every time I've done that, it's never failed.
No.
Because I think it relieves them of the fact that they can mess up and still be able to get the job done.
Yes, because I think it's so interesting. I have noticed, just observing people, I mean, we're just around so many people all day long, every day, that there's a paranoia that comes often with that fear that almost turns into this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
So I have seen so many cases where people are so nervous and paranoid that they're going to lose their job that they get this intense focus and tunnel vision on, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job. And then they do because they're not performing well anymore. I mean, they completely lose it. And when in reality, it wasn't initially on the table, but it almost becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy because they just get so whipped up about it that it impacts their ability to perform.
That is absolutely the core correct answer to the challenges that exist in business. Paradigms, the way we see the world, the beliefs we have, absolutely directly affect our behaviors that drive our results. And you're right. If you're going into something with concern, fear that it's going to break, then there's a pretty good chance it's going to.
It's going to break.
As opposed to saying that, we don't know how it's going to happen. We have to experiment. We have to try this a little bit. But you empower them to be able to say, okay, we'll try it your way. We'll try it a different way. We'll try it together, or we're going to make it work together. But paradigms are everything.
Yeah.
And you're right. Self-fulfilling prophecies, or I can give you 1,000 stories just in a week of how perceptions drove an outcome, and how, again, culture has to dispel all that.
Yeah. How do you work at First United Bank and Trust to keep that culture going? Especially, I'm sure, like any company, you have new employees coming in. So you have very tenured people, which is great, but you also have these new folks coming in. The business changes and evolves.
You mean sort of like how we onboard them, or more importantly, just how's the culture sustain itself?
How do you sustain it?
Yeah. Well, first off, we're a smaller company. We have a little over 300 employees, and that's a much easier opportunity. And working for larger banks, culture was driven based on its size, and it's really difficult. And if you work for larger places, you would understand that. And it's still somewhat of a challenge. We are very geographically spread out. We have offices from Morgantown and Fairmount all the way to Frederick, Maryland. Our headquarters is located in a very rural, kind of off the road in Oakland, Maryland. So there's a lot of separation that occurs. So for us, we have our own challenges. But I think the core element of it is a belief that communication, open and honest communication, is very important. And it flows from the top. The pandemic has been a very interesting opportunity for us because we had these challenges before. Most of the challenges back pre-pandemic was, well, how do you get people to come to one place? Because it's much easier if you have a single plant and everybody can get together and you can have the conversations. But, and not only just polling our employees, which we'll do on a periodic basis, it seems like communications is always the number one challenge because of perceptions.
Right.
Somebody hears it one way, tells it to somebody else, it goes off another way, and all of a sudden you got 350 different little perceptions of communication. The pandemic, with the technology that was available to us through Teams, all of a sudden became the way that we connected in the company. And so I think one of the great easiest things that our CEO does is every Tuesday morning has just an open Teams call. Now there's an agenda, and it connects her with the company. We're always telling people come in about 15, 20 minutes early because we can just chit chat and talk about whatever.
Oh, that's, I've not heard that before.
And it's pretty cool how that little chit chat turns into, a lot of fun. And you're more interested to get on there for the first 15 minutes of the call just to hear what everybody wants to talk about.
Oh, yeah. Who breaks the ice? That's probably another one. Is it the same person over and over?
It's always pretty interesting. There's at least one or two people that have either interesting little backgrounds that are changing and things that they do to make the meeting kind of interesting. But it's just one technique. But I think the biggest one is that you have to go out. You have to go out and touch and communicate and connect with people.
Yes.
So our management team, our executive management team, will move their meetings to local communities, not so much just to be in the community, but then use that as an opportunity to go touch the employees that might sit in a branch that would never, ever see their CEO. We get a lot of feedback from the bankers that will come from bigger places who
they're not used to that.
Well, they don't even
probably.
know who their senior manager is because they might be in another state, not alone the CEO of the company. We look at that as just kind of what we do and the normal and the right thing to do, where other people look at that as being somewhat unique. But it is through that connection that makes all the difference. And then, we do have fun, and actually one of the fun things.
I love that.
Well, one of the great things that's coming is that they've given us all an opportunity to meet at Hershey Park in a couple weeks and bring your family, and everybody's just going to go to Hershey Park as a company. But that's connection. That's the thing that keeps us going because, the business is hard. The reality is it can be tough, and there's times when we might have to work harder and we have to work smarter to get the results we're looking for, but we're people first. And what I've liked about joining this company is that the people that run our company, they've come from this. They've known each other a long time. They all went to school together in high school. They've all become these executive bankers that, quite frankly, are some of the best I've ever seen.
Wow.
I won't even say the best. They are the best I've ever seen. Our bank is performing at a very high level because of the leadership that's coming from our CEO and the management team that she's put behind it.
That's fantastic.
But it's using the culture. It's leveraging the culture that makes that all happen.
Well, and you touched upon the importance of it starting at the top and coming from the top, the visibility, I think. And again, I recognize, 300 is still a good many people, especially with being so spread out. But there's ways to be visible, whether you have 300 employees or 300,000 employees, right? But that is a really key factor, I think, too.
So how does it work then? So we also, through the course of 122 years, have come to understand what the core values of the company are. And again, those values aren't because of something we just picked out of a hat and said, this is who we're supposed to be.
This sounds good.
No, it was through a real deep understanding over the course of generations of employees that there is a core set of values. For those of you that are familiar with our bank, our branding is called My Bank.
Yes.
My Bank because it's your bank and it's everybody's bank. But we've used the letters to create the acronyms to define, the 6 core values of the bank. Now, we hire for that. And one of them is make it personal. Now, we do that for our customers because a great banking relationship is very personable.
Yes.
But in the meantime, how about working with your coworkers in this capacity? So these are things that when you just find people that want to be part of teams like this, and then there's other values that come with it. But when there's a shared set of values, then the paradigms, the beliefs are very similar. We've all come from different places. We bring diverse backgrounds, but we've been raised pretty much for the same core values. Now values, usually about 15 of them, and we're just picking on a few of them here. But when you collectively bring people together like that, the teamwork is amazing. The connections are stronger. The understanding of change is more supportive. You feel like you're in it together, and that's being able to say that when you're even so spread out like we are, because there's just a connection. So some evidence to that. So the pandemic, we had to do like a lot of other companies did. We had to send a lot of our employees home. We disconnected from our branches, who were the only ones that were still operating physically on the premises. And for the 18 months that took place, we've just in the last year started coming back with the pandemic, moving into endemic stage, and we're still having to be a little cautious about all this, has been bringing people back into the room again. And it's more fun to watch this in the training classes that my group runs, because you're going to spend 15 minutes of people just saying, good to see you again. You're not on a video call anymore. Lots of hugs. Haven't seen you for a long time. That's just
watching people's face light up.
And then it's tremendous training, because then they're all back in the room learning together. And training is really good social conduct. And you learn better with the person sitting next to you instead of being kind of isolated on a screen. But to be able to see that was just a testimony to the strength of our culture. And again, that's not by chance. That was specifically by
intentional.
Design. It truly is intentional. We do a really effective job of onboarding our employees culturally. Our orientation is set on a cultural basis. It's led by our CEO.
Wait, say that again. That's interesting.
Well, there's a commissioning process in all this, and it is the connection between the personal missions, whether people understand they have purpose or not, which is really the avenue that we're taking now with a lot of our recruiting to show people that there is purpose in what you do. But it starts with the CEO really coming in and talking not just about the strategy, but the belief system of the company and what it means to her and what it means to everybody that works there. And then the other people that come through the program do the same thing. My part of it is I teach a commissioning strategy that shows that, again, I mentioned this, that an organization's mission statement is nothing more than the collective personal missions of everybody who works there. You teach this to them. But the question by now, and most people are coming into orientation not day one. It's usually 2 or 3 weeks in. Sometimes it takes a couple months to get them into it. You always just ask the question at the end, are you seeing any of this? And they are. And they're already starting to reflect their stories. And here you got a person that's been there for 3 weeks saying, this is amazing. This is what I came for. This is what I wanted it to be. Now, again, that wasn't by chance. That was in the recruiting process.
Right.
Because we also understand they were looking for us as much as we were looking for
Absolutely.
them. And there is a fit that you have to have. And that's the one thing I advise all leaders is that once you understand what that culture is, you do recruit for it. Because not every bank's culture or not every organization's culture is going to be the same, but you want to have that alignment.
Is that part of your interviewing questions
Yeah.
that you're looking,
There's two phases of that. You're obviously looking for the competencies,
Sure.
which are really hard to do, and you want to use simulations and other types of tools to help you do that. But most of your interviews really are dealing with the connection with the person, and that is the value system that comes out. And we always know when we got the right one because the manager will come back after an interview saying, "I really like them." Now, the red flag for us is, did you check the competencies though? Can they do the job? Or was
it's great that they're nice or whatever, but can they do the job?
But the connection is because there was a shared value. And the shared value is usually about just wanting to do more, wanting to help, the things that our culture is based on, any good organization's culture is based on, but you just feel that person's going to fit.
Yeah.
And now we have other parts of that process to make sure we check the competencies, and it's just not a one and done interview. It's a multi-layered approach that we take. But it's to the point of what we said earlier, if you don't do it right, it's very expensive.
It is very expensive. So it sounds like, you, like many things that you've talked about already, you're creating a very intentional process.
Right.
Can you, because you've said commission a couple times, can you define it just, to make sure that, because it's a term that's not used very often. So would you just dive into that a little?
In some of our taglines, I say it's our mission, your mission. An organization does have a mission. Mission by definition is the purpose of why it's there, the value that it's going to create, the needs that it meets. But again, if it's nothing more than the collective personal missions of the people that work there, then again, what is the mission of the person coming to work? Right. Talents, passions, visions, and values. The commissioning process is to show them how they align to it. And so it is through discussion. It is through training. We teach core principles that help understand, where these principles all lie in. I think the biggest opportunity that's existing in business today, especially with the amount of disruption that's occurred with the Great Resignation, with a younger generation that's asking the why question, mission answers the why question. So if you can help people understand that by working there, that their purpose is going to be achieved, and that purpose can be growth, that person can be contribution, that again, if you have the right leadership and the right opportunities to provide to them, then it all comes together. Commissioning is nothing more than everybody working together towards a common purpose. And in this case, you have a mission statement that defines it, and it's usually a bunch of words. I always tell people the words are important, but it's the feeling that comes with it when you're actually living it. And so when you feel that purpose and you're living it, now you've been commissioned.
And that gives you that pride too in the work that you're doing and the people that you're with. Something that I've struggled to find the right balance, as well as some other HR professionals that I talk to a lot, is how do you balance someone's personal mission and values with the organizational, so that you have a unified team, but it's still inclusive of diversity. So bringing, all those unique things that each person brings to the table, how do you create, because what you're telling me, I do feel like it seems like you have a very inclusive culture. But there's also sometimes in an effort to create an inclusive culture, sometimes people miss the value that you get out of diversity. So I'm just curious in your thoughts on how do you balance those two? Because sometimes they feel separate from each other. They're not, but they feel separate.
And you're right, because if you don't act on it, meaning that the person has a different view or different experience and background, doesn't feel like they've been recognized, then it's going to start saying, well, maybe I don't fit here. I think it's more of the skill of just empathic listening and making people feel like they're being understood. It's mostly in the process of conversation that I think inclusion and diversity can take place. Top performing companies, top performing CEOs, they know that by bringing in diversified thought and an idea is only going to strengthen their company because of the fact that enriches their capital base. And everybody doesn't think the same way. Now, it takes a lot of effort to do that, because there's times when you as a person or you as a manager and executive are going to say, I know exactly what I need and what I have to have done here. But you have to understand that in the role of leadership, you have to pause and listen and make sure that you absorb that and empower it at the same time. The most effective leaders are constantly questioning their own thinking. They're always kind of wondering, why would anybody follow me? That's the paradigm of a good leader.
That's a good
and
question.
if you don't embrace somebody who has a different background, whether it's in whatever capacity that makes them different, then they're not going to stay. They're not going to go.
No.
It's been more interesting. My experience just working for the bank. I came from out of state. I came from a background that was unlike anything that they had, but I was completely embraced. And it was really just saying, Chuck, what can you help us with that we haven't done before?
Oh, wow.
But that's just not me. There was other examples of people that do the same thing. Now, it's one thing to do it, it's how you integrate it. And yeah, there are going to be times when, the idea isn't going to work or that background isn't going to be needed. But if you have a culture of trust, and the trust is created through open communications, it's kind of through understanding, making the person feel like they at least got to say what they felt that was important into saying it.
Yes.
As long as trust is there, then this works. If there's no trust, and I think that is the biggest issue facing the diversity challenge right now is, where does trust lie?
Yeah.
And who's going to be responsible for creating that trust? And that exists for both people. Relationships are always two-sided.
Two-sided. Yeah. And I spend a lot of time talking about trust because it really is the foundation of all relationships. Personal, professional, doesn't matter. But if you don't have trust, and we talked about fear earlier, and there's those two, really work hand in hand with each other. And what, from your perspective, gets in the way in the workplace with trust and what maybe drives some of that fear?
Change. It's rapid. It comes quickly. It's also, perceptions that are driven based on experience and understanding. It's been documented more than 1 million times that, the way that somebody at a senior level of the company would view something wouldn't be the same way that somebody at an entry level would.
Yes.
And so the basics of communications is a failure to trust. To say one thing and do another thing, which is a component of trust. I've been doing this a long time. I have to share this classic story of what created no trust at the first stage of Bank of America. The CEO of the new named company, his name was Hugh McCall. I'm sitting in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the headquarters for the bank that was the state of Florida's representing bank of the 3 states that they acquired to build a bank. He comes to Florida after probably 2 years of trying to take over the company in a very hostile way, very public way, saying seek, kill, and destroy. He comes with probably 300 officers all worrying and wondering about their jobs because their technique was to get rid of everybody or get rid of the people they didn't think they needed for the integrated company. And he stood up at the podium with a big smile on his face and says, it's jobs for everybody. And I use that as one of the greatest examples of failures of leadership I've ever seen because he lied.
Yeah, that's when my eyebrows went up. I thought, how's that? How are we going to do that?
No, I think he was just trying to be fun. He was trying to do it as an icebreaker and trying to be cute about the whole thing, but he lied. And that creates no trust.
No.
Now, there's a few other things in that playbook that I could probably talk about if you want to know the Bank of America playbook, how to integrate a company very quickly. And they're a very successful bank, by the way.
Yes.
So we're not talking about they did it wrong. It was just the way that they did it wasn't through the most effective way to create trust.
Yeah.
And so CEOs who understand that. Now, the bank that I went to in Florida that we did multiple acquisitions where we knew these principles, we did it much differently, where you were trying to build trust in the moment that you were trying to integrate with a company. But it is through communications because you have to recognize that when people don't know something, there is fear.
Yes.
And an unfulfilled paradigm is going to stray and go in 100 different directions. And if it's change, there's a natural component of fear that comes with any change.
Absolutely. You've got that fear of the unknown. And in the absence of information, we will make up our own story. And it's rarely, if ever, better than what the real story is. It's always worse, right? Whew. So much great content and things to talk about that we are actually going to continue the conversation into the next episode. So please be sure to follow and subscribe to Leadership Rediscovered so that you can listen to episode 2 of Chuck Olsson.